is up, guys? Hey, I'm super excited to be with you guys tonight. Gosh, there's so many people in this room. As we continue to talk about revival is here, you're gonna kind of notice a pattern. We're all gonna be talking about the life of David. I gotta be honest with you guys really fast though. Can I be honest with y'all? Okay. I have a really weird fear, and it's the fear that somebody comes up to me and they ask me, "Hey bro, what you got to eat?" It's the weirdest thing I know, but like if I'm having like a lunch with somebody here at the church, I've had this problem for like years now. I don't even know why. I'm not gonna call anybody out, but Pastor Danny and I, we would sit down and we would eat lunch, and year after year, he would say, "Hey bro, what you got to eat?" And every single time I just like cringe. I'd be like, chicken Alfredo, this is so weird. I don't even know why. Up until just a few months ago, I finally broke. He asked me a question, "Hey bro, what you got to eat?" And I looked at him, I said, "Pastor Andy, I gotta be honest with you right now, dude." He was like, what's up? And I said, "Dude, I don't like it when you ask me that question. It's so weird to me." And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know. It's a weird thing that I have, and I just had to tell you." And he looked me dead in the eyes and he said, maybe, just hear me out. Maybe, Kendrick, what it is that growing up in middle school and high school, you wouldn't have as nice food as your friends at the lunch table. And then now today, as a 21-year-old, you still feel that. And then when they say that and they look down upon you, you feel like you're poor. I was like, okay, that's it. Like everything inside of me went, what just happened? It was spot on. It was weird. It was like spot on, and literally all it took was me being honest. All of that, everything he just said, came from me being honest. And if I were to ask you the question right now, City Hope Youth, when was the last time you were honest with God? When was the last time you were honest with God? And I'm talking like, God, I have doubts about you. I don't even wanna have doubts, but I have doubts about you. God, I don't even like the way I look in the mirror. God, I hate the way that I sound. I hate the way that my voice sounds. God, why am I still struggling with this same thing that I feel like I've tried to work through? I'm talking about that kind of honesty. You know, there's a guy named David from a few thousand years ago, and he approaches God the same exact way. In Psalms 42, he says things like, "God, why have you forgotten me?" God, this is the deepest thing I feel like I've ever read in my life. He said, "Day and night I have only tears for food." What? He says, "God, why am I so sad? Why am I so down?" These types of questions, I want you guys to hear me today. Those aren't weird. Those aren't bad things to ask or to be honest with God. He loves when you're honest with him. How do I know this? There's a verse in Psalms, they're gonna throw it up on the screen. But it says this, "But you, God, desire honesty from the womb." Well, that "you" right there is referring to God. But you, God, desire honesty from the womb. And I know some of y'all may be in here going, "Kendrick, I don't have this giant, big secret thing in my life. I've kind of already given that to God." Let me tell you, why would that disqualify you from that verse? Why would that disqualify you from that? And some of you guys in here, you may be feeling like, "Kendrick, there actually is some really deep things in my life that I have to rip up out of the ground and say, God, here it is." And some of y'all here, you may feel like, "Kendrick, I've never even been honest with a person. How can I be honest with God?" Tell him, "I don't even know how to be honest with you." That's honest, right? But watch, the fact that David was so after God's heart, it was only because he was honest with him. So my challenge for you today, tonight, the rest of your life, is for you to be honest with God, and he'll speak back to you. My challenge for you to be honest with him, even if you can't even word it. Tell him, "God, I can't word it, but I don't understand you. I don't know what's going on with me. But God, I believe you'll speak to me, so I will be honest with you." Thank you.
Stop. All of you people. All right, I gotta go. All right, we're telling stories about David. I was like, I'm gonna tell a sad one, just because why not? So David, in his early life, if you know anything about him, he was a shepherd boy. That means he took care of sheep in his father's field. He spent a lot of time alone. In fact, his dad didn't really like him. One day, the prophet of God came. His name was Samuel. He came to David's dad. He said, bring all of your sons, put them before me. One of them is gonna be king. And David's dad was like, okay. He brought all his sons and just didn't think about David. That was the level. He didn't care about David. Eventually, David came in and the prophet looked at him and he said, David, you are God's anointed. You are going to be the king of Israel. And I'm sure David was like, wow, that's crazy. Imagine like one of those moments. You know those moments where you've been going through something and then you feel seen and you're like, oh, that's good. But what happened that was sad was immediately after that, a lot of you're gonna be the king type situation started to transpire for poor David. Right after that, David actually, the Bible tells us, had to start running for his life for 10 years. 10 years he spent running. And the Bible tells us that his only companions were thieves and the outcasts of society. And so I haven't even gotten to the bad part of the story yet, by the way. So David's just running for his life. He's in the land of his enemies. He's not even in the kingdom that he's supposed to be in. He's trying to do stuff for the Lord. And one day while he's out fighting for the Lord, the Bible says that a rival group came in and they stole all of David's wives, his children, his men's wives and children, everything. And so when they came back, they were all debating. They were like, we should kill David. They were so mad. And David in this moment, he's been running for 10 years and he was in the shepherd's field for however long, and he was just so many bad things are happening to him. And I can imagine how he felt, because there's so many times where we are in situations where we feel like we're alone, or it's just a very obscure situation. You feel like people don't see you. And we probably think kind of what David was probably thinking, which is, why is this so difficult right now? Why is this so hard? Because we're really good at being like just starting things. Have you ever been good at starting things? Have you ever been one of those people who just like clicks on the, I accept the terms and conditions of whatever this thing is? Like we click that like it's candy. Like we're like, oh yeah, we're all about honesty and truthfulness until we are point blank asked, have you read this entire thing? And you're like, absolutely. You know what? In 2 seconds, I read 47 pages that was written by an AI made in 1947. Absolutely, yeah, I read it. And it's okay for you. You guys are young. You're protected by laws and stuff like that. I'm like an old person now. Every time I click that, there's a little part of me, just a little. It's like, I really hope I didn't just sign away one of my kidneys. I hope I don't have to give away one of my children one day to Apple or whatever's going on. We're really good at clicking on things and accepting risks for the future, or we're really good at starting things and being like, it'll be okay. But what do you do one day when you're in a situation where you're trying your best, you're living for the Lord, and nobody cares? When nobody's watching you, nobody's telling you that you're doing a good job. What do you do when you're trying your absolute best and it's not good enough for anybody? That's where David is right now. He spent 10 years running. He's been doing all the right things. He's been trying, and 10 years into being the king, he's not very kingly. I'm sure he's very frustrated. So what do you do in that? I'll tell you what David did. The Bible says that David found strength in the Lord his God, which sounds awesome. But if you don't know what it means, it's kind of not helpful. Like if I'm having a bad day, if I'm frustrated and feeling unseen, and you say, Lucas, why don't you find strength in the Lord your God? I'll punch you in the face. That's not very helpful if you don't know what it means. So here's what it means. David spent time in the field, the time that we would have considered wasted time. Have you ever had time that you think is in between two important things? That's what we consider field time. That's what David spent a lot of his life in. But the Bible never says that David talked bad about his time in the field. The Bible actually says a lot of the Psalms that we read later on, the stuff that you see on the Hobby Lobby posters, all the encouraging things, those are what David wrote in the field. Those are what David was doing. He was getting close to his God. He was getting to where he knew his God. He didn't treat that time like it was in between. And because he did that, what happened was he got a bigger view of who his God was. Because when you have a big view of who your God is, your problems don't seem as big. Your problems don't affect you as much. So when David was faced with this, he looked at it and he was like, based on how I know my Father, I know I'll be okay. And I hope that you guys, if you're going through a time where you feel unseen or like what you're doing, nobody cares about, I hope that you learn in these moments that feel unimportant to dig in with your God. Because what you do right now, the preparation you do right now, one day when everybody's watching, that's what's gonna make your difference. Thank you guys.
Okay, sit down. I'm so uncomfortable, I'm sweating. Okay, all right, obviously we're talking about the story of David, but before we really dive into David, I wanna tell you a little bit about me. And not something I really do, but I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my life. So if you didn't know, I come from a really big family. And I mean, I don't say really big lightly. I have 6 siblings and I am smack dab beautifully in the middle of all 6 of those siblings. And my family's amazing. Cooper and Jax, y'all are the best out of us, but no one has to know that. But my family's amazing. My brother and my sister, they went to ministry school before I did, and they are working at churches, and they're awesome. But the thing is, when I started to come into ministry school, I was so filled with all of this insecurity and all of this like crisis, because every single person that looked at me was like, you know what? You're just not gonna live up to your siblings. Your siblings are just so much better than you. I had somebody come up to me and they said, you know, your family is just so awesome. I just forget that you exist. And I was like, okay, this is great. I love this great start to going to ministry school. And see, I was going into ministry school and I was just filled with so much insecurity. I was filled with every single voice that was inside my head that came from the enemy. I was filled with every single thing that the enemy was trying to tell me. And I stopped listening to God. I stopped listening to what he wanted me to hear. I stopped listening to the purpose that he had for me, because really the funny thing was I was in the right place. It was the right time, and I was doing exactly what God asked me to do, and that was ministry school. See, the thing about David, he was in the right place doing the right thing at the right time, and yet the enemy was still trying to attack his identity. See, you'll see in the Bible that David was out in the fields and he was taking care of sheep, and no one saw him because he was the youngest and the littlest, and he was taking care of these sheep, and lions came and he took out lions, and bears came and he took out bears, and he was doing all that God asked him to do. But in those moments when he was in the fields listening to God, that is the only voice that he could hear, because everybody else that was trying to tell him lies, all of those voices were turned off because God's voice was the loudest. See, in those moments when I was filled with so much insecurity, I turned off the voice of God and I started turning on all of the people that were the least significant in my life, and I made their voices the most significant. See, there were people in my corner that did believe in me. There were people in my corner that were saying, you can succeed in ministry, but I let the people that were the most insignificant be the most significant. See, you'll see later on in scripture that David went to the battlefield. His dad had asked him to bring some sandwiches to his brother, and we'll see in 1 Samuel 17, it said, but when David's oldest brother, Eli, heard David talking to men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep you were supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit, and you just want to see the battle. See, a lot of times the people who are trying to attack your identity are the ones that are most secure in their own identity. A lot of times the voices that you've turned up so loud and that you're tuning into and that are trying to tell you that you're not enough are the ones that are the most insecure about themselves. But when you are tuned into the voice of God, you don't have to worry about that identity or that purpose, because God's voice is the loudest and God's voice is always true. See, the thing is, a lot of us, we start to attack and do all of these things, like David was taking out lions and taking out bears, but those moments when he was picking up those stones, he knew his purpose. He knew that in the end, that is what his goal was. See, a lot of us are comparing ourselves and getting filled with all of this identity crisis, and you're not realizing that the stones that you're picking up to take on to the next thing and take out that bear and take out that lion, you're not either confident that that's your purpose because you're too busy looking at the person next to you and saying, but God, why are they crying? praying? Why are they going out and making encounters and making Bible studies? Why are you speaking to them, but you're not speaking to me? We are so filled with insecurity that it is keeping us from hearing the voice of God. But sometimes when we are filled with so much insecurity, the stones that God has asked us to pick up and go and defeat Goliath, it is keeping us from the actual purpose that we are supposed to be doing, because we are trying to fit a mold. We are trying to fit something else because you want to be like the person next to you, because you are not secure in the person God created you to be. And I want to challenge each and every single one of you to be confident in who God created you to be, because you were created for greatness. We saw a year where God used greatness in each and every single one of us, but you have to be confident in your identity. You have to be tuned into the voice of God. So I pray that you humble yourself at the feet of Jesus and you ask God, what's my identity? What's my purpose? And let him use you.
I'll wait, you guys. Just take a seat, it's okay. Hey, my time's already started. See what you did? You guys remember when we were kids and we all thought we were the crocodile hunter? And we were obsessed with catching wild animals. Like, catching animals was cool, but releasing them, exhilarating, because you never knew what to expect. Kind of like this.
This is my pet duck, Adam, going for his first swim. Be careful, Adam.
Adam, my boy Adam wasn't asking questions, didn't have any thoughts, wasn't waiting for permission. Adam just got to moving because he was free. And the same should be said of us as believers, that when we experience revival, there's no hesitation. We just get to moving. And we should respond this way because we serve a God of movement. Stagnant's not in his character, so if we're gonna fight to follow, we've gotta be moving and active. Even the enemy knows that a believer that isn't moving is a believer that is losing. So we've gotta be moving and active throughout this fight to follow. And this is where we see David. In Samuel 17, it says he's going back and forth helping his father with the sheep. So we see not only are giants being slain, but sheep are being tended to, because David was moving. He was fighting and he was tending and he was staying active in the battle. Later on in the chapter, it says Goliath's moving toward David and David starts running after Goliath. And this is a picture that shows us that victory for God's people cannot be stopped when God's people are moving and responding with the Lord on our side. Isn't that good? With the Lord on our side. And so what we see is that David went to the battlefield. He goes to his brothers. He moves toward Goliath. Does that mean David was just a busy guy? No, it means that everything he did had purpose. Everything he did was intentional. And so what I see is a man that wouldn't dare get caught sleeping on the watch of victory for his people. I see a man that had resolved within himself that he wouldn't get caught standing idle in crucial moments, but he'd be a man of movement. And I pray the same for us as a ministry, that we wouldn't get caught doing anything but responding to the revival that God has for us right where we are, because revival is here, right? So we've got to keep on moving. Moving toward what? Him. Let me remind you really quick, he is still the guide, he is still the target and the focus and the bullseye, and fighting to follow demands that we keep our eyes locked on Jesus and we keep our lives positioned to respond to him and him alone. Literally just yesterday, I celebrated 13 years since I was a lost little boy, hopeless and didn't know anything, had no purpose, and I found Jesus, I found hope, and I found freedom. And it's the best thing ever. And every moment after that, I just continue to follow the Lord and stay active, because that moment was awesome. But it's all the movement after that and being faithful and acting on my faith that has got me to the moment where I am right now. So if we're going to continue to experience revival, we have to just keep moving. We have to just keep moving, because revival isn't just a moment. Revival is about movement. And we've experienced it, but whenever you're ready, revival can stop. How? Well, God's people just stop moving and responding. Remember, we said he's a God of movement. We see this in a crazy story on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus' disciples are on top of a mountain. Miraculous things start happening. Moses and Elijah show up, and the disciples go, "This is sick. We should stay." And Jesus said, "Nah." He packs up everything, and he takes them down the mountain. They wanted to stay, but Jesus wanted to move. Why? Because at the bottom of the mountain, there was still revival to be experienced. There was a mass of people. They're asking questions. They're in need. There's a man whose son was
was being tormented and needed healing. And so the disciples followed Jesus because he made it clear we have to just keep moving. It reminds me of Dory. I know you're thinking about it. Just keep swimming, right? In the same vein, the plea tonight is to just keep moving, because like we said, revival isn't about a moment, it's about movement. So we have to keep moving. Because just like them, there is more for us. I don't know if you know this. They had the masses, the Father and the Son. And we've got to come down because there's more for us. There are more schools. There are more friends. There is more freedom to see. So we have to just keep moving. Look at your neighbor, say, just keep moving. And so we're not going to slow down. We're not going to stop pursuing. We're not going to stop now, because there is more. There is more for us to experience. So we have to just keep moving. Say with me, just keep moving. And I believe when God's people are moving and God's people are responding, revival isn't going anywhere. So we have to. And I believe there is a harvest still to reap for City Hope Youth, so we have to. And I believe there's still friends in your lives that need addictions to be broken by the power of Jesus, so we just have to. And I believe there is still hope to be found for that teacher tomorrow, so we have to. And I believe there's still some of you in this room that have callings to receive and accept and to walk out with the Lord, so we just have to. And so now is not the time to slow down pursuing the Lord. Now is not the time to be stagnant in our faith. Now is not the time for your voice to shift into the shadows, because revival is here. So now is the time to. I love you, City Hope Youth.
City Hope Youth, tonight we have been going through the life of David, and if you haven't gathered by now, we can see that David was a fighter. But tonight I want to end on a different note, because we actually see an account of David's life where David actually loses a fight. And so I don't want to go any further without diving into this story, because I believe that in order for us to see the breakthrough that we have, that God has in store for us in our lives, we must conquer this battle that we see David lose. And we see this in 2 Samuel. We're going to have it on the screens, and it says, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the army and laid siege to the city. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. What we see in this story is that in a time when God had called David to go and fight, he stays in the comfortability of his kingdom. He remains on his throne when God had called him to go with his army and fight in a battle. And because of this, later in this story, we see David on a balcony. And it's on that balcony when he sees a married woman that he's attracted to along the way, and he invites her to come into his room. He sleeps with her, she becomes pregnant, and because of this, he sends for her husband to be killed on the front lines of war. And when I read this account of David's life, I can't help but to wonder, how does this happen? How does a man that God calls a man after his own heart, a man that slayed a giant as a boy, the man that was anointed from head to toe with oil, who God chose to be the leader of his people in Israel, how does this man find himself in such a moment of failure? See, the battle that David lost, the fight that he lost, was his battle with purity. And before I continue any further, I want to clarify that purity is not just sexual. I know that when we have this conversation, we immediately think that that's what we're talking about, but God desires total purity within your heart. He desires you to have pure motives and pure speech, purity in the way that you live your life, purity in your friendships. And so David's battle that he lost was a battle with purity. And just as we can see David lose this battle, we also see redemption in David's life later on when he comes to grips almost a year later with this reality that he was in, where he messed up big time and he's forced to face his consequences. We see this in Psalms, and he simply says, as he cries out to God, God, would you create in me a clean heart, O God, and would you renew a right spirit within me?
What I love about David's prayer in this moment is he's seeking God to restore purity in this moment. Is he doesn't say, hey, God, would you come clean up my mess? Hey, God, would you come fix this thing inside of my heart? He says, no, God, would you take this heart that I have and would you give me a complete new one? Would you completely rewrite the desires of my heart to align with yours? And through that, would you renew a righteous spirit within me by your spirit? See, I believe that if we're going to be a people that will fight to follow, we must be a people that will fight for our purity. And I say this tonight because the story of David is so impactful, but if David can fail, we can too, and we're called to fight to follow. When I was younger, one of the things that I hated more than anything in the world was Saturday morning watching cartoons, my mom opening the door, and you've probably heard it, and she would say, Brian, you gotta clean your room. Turn off the TV, cancel everything for the next few hours. You're gonna be right here cleaning this room. And even though I hated this, what I loved is something that my mom implemented in my life that I've carried with me throughout my adult life is she would tell me, Brian, if you would just learn to keep your room clean, then you would never have to clean it. And what she meant is that if I would put my laundry away as soon as it got in my room instead of letting it accumulate and pile up, or if I would vacuum my room regularly, or if I would make sure that the trash is taken out before it begins to overflow in my room, that I wouldn't have to have these times where I just sit and clean all day long and it ruins my day. And although this impacted me throughout my life, I believe that this can also impact us in our spiritual lives. Because if we'll learn to keep our heart pure, to make that the main thing consistently, then I believe that we can avoid these moments where we just sit in our sorrow and our pain and God, how did I get to this place? And what I don't mean is that you won't struggle with sin. I'm not telling you that God is calling you to be perfect, but I can tell you that God's calling you to purity, that God's calling you to something more. Imagine if you were to go to camp this summer and you didn't have to spend the whole first night begging for God's forgiveness for the lifestyle that you've been living the past couple months. Imagine if you could come into a youth night on a Wednesday and you didn't have to spend the entire 2 first songs sitting in shame and pain for the addictions that you've been facing throughout the week. Because I want to tell you that the lie that the enemy has fed you, that you can't live a pure life, that you have to sit in that, is a lie. And there's so much greater for your life than the life that you have been living. And we see David when he discovers this later on in Psalms, as we see him find the cure to his brokenness. As he comes to grips and he says, God, the sacrifice that you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, oh God. And so if you're struggling with your heart, if you're struggling and you find yourself in a place where you would say, if I could just beat this one sin, if I could just get rid of these 1 or 2 addictions in my life, then my relationship with God would be so amazing. Maybe you've been trying to fix those things instead of fixing the thing that can bring healing to your life. How crazy is it that when we find ourselves in a place of habitual sin, that we will run from the only one that can save us from that sin? That we find ourselves turning back on our Savior as he says, I just need your heart. And tonight we're gonna have a moment where you can respond, and as we just read, tonight, God desires a brokenness in your heart, a brokenness in your spirit, and the promise that he gives us in this moment is, hey, I won't turn you away. I won't reject you if your heart is truly broken for what breaks my heart. And so in a minute, KB is gonna come up and he's gonna invite you, and he's gonna give an invitation for you to come up front for prayer. And if that's you and you would say, I'm tired of this mess. I'm tired of living a life of not being pure. I'm tired of feeling this way. Every time I come into God's presence, having to jump over this hurdle because of my lifestyle. If you're in that place when KB invites you up to this front, the only question that will be left is, tonight, will you make a decision to fight for your purity?